Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, hockey fans. It is a pretty manageable 5 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Fahrenheit in a clouded but finally sunny Bridgewater, Nova Scotia today. My name is Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to the Wednesday, April 13th edition of the Bridgewater's Finest 2016 NHL Playoffs podcast. And since it's Wednesday, April 13th, you know what that means. It means we finally get to talk about some games. We get to talk about hockey games. Fantastic. We actually have 3 games on the schedule tonight. The playoffs begin tonight. It's the day that we've been waiting for. We're going to get right into it. Going to do a little bit of housekeeping first. A couple of things that happened while we were recording the podcast yesterday. So it's really hard to break news on a daily podcast like this. I guess I should just have Twitter up at all times. This serves as your final reminder. This is your last chance to join my 2016 NHL.com Bracket Challenge. Now, the link to that, again, is in the description to this video, yesterday's video, and the video for Monday. The brackets lock at 6:59 p.m. Eastern Time today. So if it's after that point, unfortunately, they've already locked. This is your last chance to get in on that NHL.com Bracket Challenge. Put your NHL March Madness style bracketology up against mine, as well as plenty of other YouTube prognosticators, Geo Knows, Hatbox Kid, Billy B, Andrew Warren, and more. And speaking of Andrew Warren, I want to just take a second, a special shout out to Andrew. Andrew has done his first round NHL predictions for the 2016 playoffs, and that link is in the description below to this video as well. So good on you, Andrew, for getting those out. And I think I'll take this last opportunity very quickly, just one more time, to remind you what my first round predictions were. This will be the last time I do it, I promise, because I've done it now 3 days in a row. Eastern Conference, I'm taking the Capitals in 6 over the Flyers, the Penguins in 7 over the Rangers, the Panthers in 6 over the Islanders, and the Red Wings in 7 over Tampa Bay. In the Western Conference, I'm taking the Stars in 5 over the Wild, the Blackhawks in a full 7 games over the Blues. I'm taking the Ducks in 6 games over the Predators, and the Kings in 6 games over San Jose. Okay, so we've gotten all that out of the way. Now it's time to talk about some of the things that literally happened yesterday while I was recording the podcast. And the one big one was a little shakeup continuing in Ottawa. In a news item that literally broke halfway through yesterday's recording, the Ottawa Senators have fired head coach Dave Cameron, as well as several staff members, again, literally while I was recording yesterday's podcast. So again, it's going to be kind of hard to break news on this thing, especially where it's not live. But yeah, while I was recording yesterday, Ottawa fired Dave Cameron, some of their staff. I think they promoted one of the assistants or one of the scouts or something to a new position, but that was minor. The big deal here is that they fired Dave Cameron, and after the season that they had, and it's so weird to kind of talk about quote-unquote after the season that they had. Ottawa didn't have a terrible season. Like, it wasn't a terrible season. They missed the playoffs, but it wasn't like it was terrible. I think the problem here is that so many teams gauge success. Their only marker for success, unless you're apparently Toronto, the only marker for success is, did we make the playoffs? And if we didn't make the playoffs, well, then the season wasn't successful. That's more of the financials of hockey kind of leaking through there, and I can understand why it does, especially for team owners and investors and things like that. So it's not that I don't understand it. It's just I'm like, well, I mean, there's more to success than just making the playoffs. But in any case, Ottawa clearly feels like a lot of changes need to come. Dave Cameron is gone, so Ottawa's looking for a new head coach. It looks like the front runner there is probably Mark Crawford. He's been overseas for the last couple of years, kind of actually sort of reinventing himself as a coach, dealing with a lot of younger players and dealing with superstar players. And Mark Crawford could be a really good fit there for Ottawa, actually, a defensive-minded coach. It'll be interesting to see what happens for the Senators. Also, I feel I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I believe the final rankings for international and North American skaters came out yesterday. No surprise, Auston Matthews retaining his number one spot on the international rankings. He is pretty well consensus to go number one in the draft this year. A bit of a surprise on the North American side, Cape Breton left winger Pierre-Luc Dubois from the Quebec Major Junior League jumping 6 spots to take the number one spot in North America, leaping over, I believe, Alex Nylander and Tkachuk, I believe, were the two that he jumped over. But we got a new number one on this side of the pond, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Again, I would be shocked if Auston Matthews doesn't go number one in the draft. Who he's going to go to remains to be seen. That'll be an interesting, a lot of fans in this country are paying particularly close attention to that because there's a real good chance that a Canadian team gets it. So that'll be interesting to see who gets the first overall pick, and then the surprise that will surprise no one, Auston Matthews going first. So as you'll no doubt remember from yesterday's podcast, I posed a number of questions to you guys, my listeners, to give me some feedback in the comments section of yesterday's episode. I actually got some really good and really insightful feedback from some people, so I want to go over some of the best. A comment here from Sean Morgan. The fact that Pavel Datsyuk collected 4 Lady Byng trophies in a row, while also being one of the best back-checking forwards in the league, is enough for me. Without even bringing up his stick-handling skills, he'll be in the Hall of Fame for sure. He continues, the Edmonton situation is obvious to about everyone who watches hockey. That's a bit of a bold statement, but alright. They've drafted forwards with their first overall pick year after year and neglected the rest of the team. Hard to argue with that. It's time for them to cash in those young talents and build a solid team from top to bottom. He continues, I wouldn't give Connor McDavid this captaincy given his age and contribution thus far, but to be fair, my favorite player of all time is Steve Yzerman, and I love that comparison between Connor McDavid and Steve Yzerman. I'm not saying he's going to be Steve Yzerman, but I just love the comparison between the two of them. Steve Yzerman walked into an underperforming team as a kid and took the captaincy, and look how that turned out. It is an interesting perspective, and it is food for thought when you're thinking about Connor McDavid in terms of the captaincy for the Oilers. Thank you very much, Sean, for your comments. Got a good comment here from fellow YouTube prognosticator Gio Knows, one of the best in the game. First, he starts off with a little shot at my Habs, which I won't repeat for posterity. You can go read it in the comments section of yesterday's video. He says he's going with Anaheim to win the Stanley Cup this year, which is probably a pretty solid pick from top to bottom. Anaheim's healthy, and they look like they're ready for a deep run. The Leafs should keep the pick, he says, in terms of even if they don't get the number one overall pick, he says the Leafs should keep it. He's also sick and tired of watching the Oilers pick high every year, only to throw their players out to the wolves by putting them out there on the first line. Which that I kind of thought was an interesting perspective too. You draft these guys high, and you're like, okay, you are responsible for our primary offense in your first season, go. And that can be pretty overwhelming for a young player, rather than, even if they are an elite player, taking them and putting them on the secondary scoring line or even a third line scoring, kind of insulate them to get them their initial NHL experience before giving them more responsibility moving forward. Now, it looks like it's worked out for Connor McDavid. It looked like it worked out for Taylor Hall, but it doesn't always work out. See Nail Yakupov. So that's an interesting perspective there, and it's a good one. Thank you very much, Gio, for your comment. Air Jordan 23 chimes in here with, first, Pavel is a Hall of Famer, 100% agreed. The Avalanche should fire Patrick Waugh, but Joe Sakic doesn't have the heart to fire him. Too much talent on that team. No reason to go from division champion to missing the playoffs back-to-back years. I 100% agree with that. If you go from winning your division to missing the playoffs, there's a significant problem there, and it's probably more than just one or two things. See Montreal. Air Jordan 23 continues, McDavid being captain is fine. Look at Taves. The Blackhawks didn't know what the playoffs were, but still named him captain at 20 years old. The rest is history. That's a good perspective, too. I mean, Taves obviously came into the league with a little more insulation, I think, than McDavid has, even though there's all kinds of talent on that team. But it is an interesting perspective because you're not wrong. I mean, you are right. He came into the league, boom, they didn't know what the playoffs were, and they have found subsequent success. So it's a good comparison. Getting Matthews would be awesome for the Leafs, but I agree, getting a few good players is better than one great player. Oilers tried the one-player approach and have failed miserably. That's a nice little comparison, too. I like drawing the dichotomy there between the Leafs and the Oilers. So Air Jordan 23 thinks maybe if they don't get the top pick, they should trade it. All things apart, can't wait to hear the podcast tomorrow. Blackhawks tomorrow, cue the dagger. Thank you very much for your comment, Air Jordan 23. And just so you'll like me more, go Blackhawks. And turns 35 YOLO. I just had to take a pause after I said that name. Turns 35 YOLO chimes in saying Datsyuk is definitely a Hall of Famer. So we seem to have pretty well consensus that Pavel Datsyuk is a Hall of Famer. That doesn't surprise me at all. You just look at him and you look at what he can do on the ice and you think, that's a guy that's noteworthy. That's a guy that's a Hall of Fame player. We didn't have consensus on McDavid as captain. We didn't have consensus on whether the Leafs should keep the pick, so it's good. We got a differing of opinion in there, and that's what we like. All right, folks, let's preview some games here. This is what we're here for. Once again, we got a slate of 3 games kicking off the playoffs tonight. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference with Detroit traveling to Tampa Bay to take on the Lightning. Obviously, that series is tied at 0. This game begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, so 8 p.m. Atlantic time for me. In Canada, you can see this game on CBC. It's also available on Fox Sports and the NBC Sports Network in the United States. Your likely goaltending matchup tonight is going to be Jimmy Howard for the Red Wings taking on Ben Bishop from Tampa Bay. One of the big storylines I'm going to be paying attention to for this game, could be Pavel Datsyuk kicking off his swan song. And if this is going to be his last go-around in the NHL, kind of like Peyton Manning in the NFL, if this is going to be his last go-around, then I imagine he wants to make it as spectacular as humanly possible. I will be paying attention to every single shift Pavel Datsyuk is on the ice that I am watching. I will be paying particular attention to him. I think he's going to have a phenomenal playoff. I get this feeling that it is going to be his last hurrah, and if it is, I think Datsyuk's going to show us something very special. One of the things we got to pay attention to in Tampa Bay, since the Steven Stamkos injury, their goal scoring has taken a dip, and the dip is noticeable. They've scored 13 goals in those 5 games without Stamkos. That's only an average of 2.6 per game versus their average on the season, which we mentioned in the first episode, 2.73. So that is a bit of a dip. It's not ridiculous, but it is definitely a bit of a dip, and I think goals are going to be at a premium in this series. So it'll be interesting to see how Tampa Bay's offense performs without Stamkos, potentially without Tyler Johnson, potentially without Victor Hedman, at least for a little bit in this series. Tampa Bay's offense is going to be very interesting to watch here to see what they're going to be able to pull off. And on the same level, one of the last things I'm going to be paying attention to for this game is what can we expect from Jonathan Drouin. Drouin has been one of the primary storylines in the NHL this year. His love-hate relationship with head office, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Drouin is going to do now that the bright lights of the playoffs are on him. So this is a kid that, I've seen him thrive in pressure before. I've seen him do it. I watched him play in Halifax. Even when he was the primary offensive weapon on the team, I've seen him under the bright lights, and the kid can play. He scored an overtime Game 7 goal in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. The celebration was unbelievable, but you can just see the talent in this kid to take over a hockey game. So I'll be really interested to see what we're going to get from Jonathan Drouin, what can be expected from Drouin. I kind of expect him to score a goal tonight. I'm not going to lie. I expect him to go out there, put a dagger in the heart, in the eyeball maybe, of his haters, score a goal tonight. Could it be the game winner? Potentially. My prediction tonight is Tampa Bay taking Game 1 by a score of 2-1. I think it'll be in regulation. I don't think this game goes to overtime. This is going to be a low-scoring series, folks, one way or the other. Going to be great goaltending on both sides. I think Ben Bishop comes out and shines tonight. Maybe 30-plus saves if Detroit can really get the pressure on late in the game. I expect a Tampa Bay 2-1 victory in Game 1. We're going to stay in the East now, looking at the New York Rangers traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the Penguins. This series, of course, tied up at 0. This game begins at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Atlantic. You can see this game on Sportsnet in Canada. It's also on the USA Network as well as MSG Network in the U.S. Your likely goaltending matchup, we have no idea. We know it's going to be Henrik Lundqvist for the Rangers. There has been no word yet on whether Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be ready to start this game. My feelings on it is that he's probably not going to be ready. He may be available, but I don't think he's going to be ready to start. I would expect to see Jeff Zatkoff in net tonight for the Penguins. That could be an issue. Possibly. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with Jeff Zatkoff as a goaltender. He's not Marc-Andre Fleury. That's the big question mark for this game. Who is going to play in net for the Penguins? And again, no one has said anything. There hasn't been any official word through any official channel. I even checked Twitter, saw absolutely nothing. I'm literally going on my phone right now. I'm going to pull up Twitter. This is good podcasting right here. I'm going to just do a search term on Fleury. And we're going to do this. We're going to look at top tweets. Taking a second to load. The top tweet is the Pittsburgh Penguins official Twitter account from yesterday saying, "I miss playing. I'm glad it's going the right way." But if you looked at Fleury's interviews or anything like that, like the dude just doesn't look like he's ready to play. Fleury doesn't sound right to me in radio interviews. Bonjour, je voudrais un McFlurry. I think that's something from McDonald's. Penn's line finally avails. Pittsburgh minus 135 for the game tonight. Would say that means Fleury's playing in nets for Pittsburgh. Everybody is keeping Marc-Andre Fleury's availability very close to the chest. If he is available to play tonight, I would imagine it's going to be one of those Jake Allen situations where he's available, but he's on the bench. I figure Fleury will only go in there if Zatkoff is getting shelled. I would expect to see Lundqvist versus Zatkoff in net tonight, but you never know. These things are subject to very quick changes, so you really never know. Another storyline I'm going to be looking at for this game, which Henrik Lundqvist is actually going to show up. Is it going to be the Lundqvist who is a proven playoff performer who can take a series on his back, win a series on his own? Or is it going to be the Lundqvist that we have seen in his last 5 games? The last 5 times he has stepped on the ice, he's only won 2 of those games with a no decision. He's given up 14 goals. He's been shelled for only an .886 save percentage. That is not the numbers we expect from Henrik Lundqvist. So the goaltending is really going to be the primary focus, I would say, of tonight's game. Interesting note, Alain Vigneault came out yesterday and said of his captain, Ryan McDonagh, he will not be ready for Game 1, obviously, but he might still go at some point this round. I would be very interested to see whether McDonagh will be ready for this round. I think if New York is put in a situation where they're down 3-1, 3-2, you may see Ryan McDonagh come in there as kind of a last-ditch effort to shore up the defense. I don't think there's going to be much of any defense in tonight's game. I am predicting a Pittsburgh Penguins victory 5-3. I figure you probably put an empty netter in there somewhere, so it's 4-3. Pittsburgh gets the empty netter. I'm taking the Penguins tonight to win Game 1, 5-3 on home ice. And the final game we're going to look at today is Chicago traveling to St. Louis to take on the Blues. This series, obviously, knotted up at 0 games apiece. This game begins at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 10:30 Atlantic time. It's available on Sportsnet 360 in Canada, as well as the NBC Sports Network in the U.S. Your likely goaltending matchup will be Corey Crawford between the pipes for the defending Stanley Cup champion Blackhawks, taking on Brian Elliott for the Blues. As we mentioned before, Jake Allen is available in this game, but will be riding the bench. The primary matchup in this series is going to be the matchup of those all-world top-flight right wingers. Patrick Kane for the Chicago Blackhawks, the top scorer in the NHL this year, versus one of the most dangerous snipers in this league in Vladimir Tarasenko, the Tarasenko, if you will. You take a look at these guys in terms of playoffs. Obviously, the edge goes to Kane in terms of experience, and it's not even close. Kane has about 10 times worth of game played experience in the playoffs, and Patrick Kane is a playoff performer any way you slice it. Dude's got 114 points in 116 playoff games. That's unbelievable. A point-a-game player in the playoffs over that span of time, it's just unbelievable. Tarasenko in his own right, he's only played 13 playoff games, but he's got 11 points, 10 of them are goals. So To that point, Tarasenko is showing himself to be a bit of a playoff performer as well, but a much smaller sample size. So that, I think, is going to be your primary matchup there. Those top line, those top flight right wingers kind of going at each other. And neither of them are all that big. I mean, Kane's only 5'11", Tarasenko's only 6 feet. So, I mean, these guys are not huge, but they are very, very, very talented. Obviously, all eyes are going to be on Brian Elliott between the St. Louis Blues pipes. He is a reliable goaltender. He is a solid goaltender. If he gets into some trouble, do we see Jake Allen in this game? It says he's available, but that would be a real test. If Elliott gets hit up early for a couple of goals, is it possible that we see Jake Allen? You fall into that whole 1A and 1B situation that I talked about yesterday that I really, really, really don't like. Certainly, if it's my team, I'm like, oh, geez, I really don't like this because nobody can get into a groove. So all eyes are going to be on Brian Elliott between the pipes for the St. Louis Blues. Of note, Andrew Ladd, Marian Hossa, David Backes, and Troy Brouwer are all a go for Game 1. They were injury concerns on both sides of the puck. All 4 of those players are available, will be dressed, and will be playing tonight. I think I may have said in one of the previous episodes, I think this is the series to watch in the Western Conference. Chicago-St. Louis, I think it's going to go all the way. Obviously, I think the Blackhawks are going to take it in 7. Tonight, I like a 3-2 Chicago Blackhawks victory on enemy ice. And what the hell, let's get greedy. Let's put it in overtime too. Blackhawks 3-2 in overtime to win Game 1. All right, folks, that's going to do it for today's episode. It's a very short episode, but I'm just excited that we actually get to watch some puck tonight. So I'm very excited for the finally the beginning of the playoffs. One more time, last reminder, I promise. 2016 NHL.com bracket challenge. The information is in the description below. Today is your last day to join. Brackets lock at 6:59 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you check out Andrew Warren's quarterfinal NHL predictions for the 2016 playoffs. Thank you guys one more time so much because the feedback on the first 2 episodes have been great. Apparently the show is getting a little bit of play on Reddit, which I find very interesting. So thank you to my Reddit fans, all 2 of you. But it's cool. I mean, it's really cool. The feedback's been great. The listenership has been great. And I'm having fun. I'm enjoying this. So that's going to do it for the Wednesday, April 13th edition of the Bridgewater's Finest 2016 NHL Playoffs podcast. I'm Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Enjoy the games tonight, folks. You have earned them. And we'll see you tomorrow.